And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hi everyone, and now for your marine forecast. These forecasts were issued Friday, October 17th. So today's sea ice edge, not much change, just a little slow growth going on toward the south, and not much else to say, but we're still watching it, and we're well past the sea ice minimum. So, for tonight, a weak low up in the Chukchi Sea with a front extended inland. We do have two lows in the Gulf, 980 parent low and a triple point that's about 985 millibars off of Prince of Wales Island. A little bit of ridging along the Bering Sea coastline. Off of Cape Romanzoff, we've got a high of about 1016 millibars, and a weak low developed near Shimia about 1009, but that's not the big player yet. So on Saturday, the low that was in the Gulf drifts toward the southeast, and the pressure gradient, which is causing the wind, is reduced quite a bit over the Gulf. There's still some offshore flow, particularly coming out of Kennedy Entrance. We also have high pressure now up toward Norton Sound, about 1015 millibars or so. Still a weak low in the Chukchi Sea, about 1000 millibars. And a new low has formed near the Gulf of Anadyr, about 1004 millibars. And it has a front extending to the south, but it's a pretty weak front. You don't see a whole lot of the black lines on the map nearby. But there's a 979 millibar low that rapidly developed south of the central Aleutians, and that one is going to move over to the Gulf and eventually die. So on Sunday, the low that was south of the Aleutians is now moved into the Gulf a couple of hundred miles south of Kodiak Island, 968 millibars. So a very rapid development. A lot of wind with this system, at least gale force. Might see a few storm force on the backside, but they'll be outside of the marine areas. And then we have some onshore flow all the way up throughout Prince William Sound or so, maybe the North Gulf Coast, and then some flow aloft over the Panhandle. In the meantime, that low that was near Anadyr is slowly moved up to the Bering Strait, about 1003 millibars, and a weak front connected to the gale that's down south of Kodiak Island. In the meantime, we got a whole new player, 980 millibars just west of Shimia there, and a full occluded front around that. So now let's take a look at some of the details in the forecast. For southeast Alaska on Saturday, we have some northerlies in the northern part of the inside waters, 20 to 25 knots and seas 5 feet. But in Clarence Strait, we've got southeasterlies, gale force 35 knots and seas 12 feet. In the meantime, some 35 knot gales off the southern outside waters and seas up to about 16 feet. And you see that wind taper off to about 15 to 20 knots off the northeast Gulf Coast. And then for Sunday, the winds on the inside generally become northerly, about 10 to 15 knots or so, seas 2 feet in the north, but the residual of a lot of wind waves, and particularly around the entrances, about 9 feet, particularly when you look at right at the entrance to between Clarence Strait and Dixon Entrance. In the meantime, on the outside, northerlies in the southern part, about 15 to 20 knots, seas up to 15 feet with a very large swell that has moved into the Gulf that all got pumped up around that rapidly developing low that is going to move up into the Gulf and eventually die. In the meantime, westerlies off of Sitka, about 15 knots and seas 12 feet, and then 15 to 20 knots as you get further north with an easterly component and seas up to about 9 feet. So for south central forecast, generally a northerly component, some west wind, some east wind added to that. Wind speeds 20 to 25 knots in the east. And then in Cook Inlet, generally northerlies about 15 knots, seas 3 feet, till you get down to off of Augustine. And then it's a northwesterly 35 knots gale force, seas 8 feet, and 30 knots as you get further out, Kennedy Entrance, seas 8 feet. Now on Sunday, things ratchet down a little bit, except if you're in lower Cook Inlet, where we got northerlies 15 knots, seas 3 feet in upper Cook Inlet, but small craft advisory 25 knots and seas up to 7 feet as you go further south. Meantime, in the outside waters, now you've got an easterly component of the wind, 15 to 20 knots, seas up to about 6 feet. And then for Prince William Sound, generally northeasterly direction, 10 knots, seas 2 feet. So for the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, starting out, we've got generally northwesterlies on the Gulf side, wind ranging from about 30 to down to 15 knots, and seas up to about 7 feet down off of False Pass. On the Bering Sea side, 15 knots, seas up to 4 feet, and generally a northerly component of the wind, a little northeasterlies off of Cold Bay. So now we've got Sunday, and we've got northeasterlies all across the area on the Gulf side. Wind speeds 25 to 30 knots, seas up to 6 feet, except 9 feet off of False Pass, where there was a fetch and the residual of that large swell that moved into the Gulf. In the meantime, up to small craft advisory winds on the Bering Sea side, northeasterlies generally 20 to 25 knots and seas up to 6 feet. So for the Aleutians, on the Bering Sea side, generally stronger winds in the west, 20 to 25 knots, seas up to 6 feet, but 10 to 15 knots in the central and eastern Aleutians, and seas up to 8 feet, residual swell there. On the Pacific side, we've got quite a very large range of wind speeds. South of Kiska, small craft advisory southeasterlies 25 knots, seas 7 feet. In the meantime, westerlies off of south of Shemya, 20 knots, seas 6 feet, and then 10 to 20 knots south of the eastern Aleutians, and really quite variable directions, and with the residual swell, seas up to 9 feet. Now for Sunday, things start to ramp up again with those systems that are moving through, and that's where the storm track is. So we've got wind ranging from 20 to gale force 35 knots in the far west, seas up to about 10 feet on the Bering Sea side. And then on the Pacific side, southeasterlies 40 knots, seas up to 13 feet in the far western Aleutians. Gale force southwesterlies 35 knots, seas 10 feet in the Amchitka area. And then 20 to 30 knots generally has some west or northerly component on the wind, 20 to 30 knots, and seas up to 11 feet. Now for the west coast. Starting out, westerlies in Nortontown, 20 knots, seas 5 feet, 15 knots from Imanik down to Nunivak Island. St. Matthew, southwesterlies 20 knots, seas 4 feet. For the Pribilofs, easterlies 15 knots, seas 4 feet, and then northerlies as you get further east. And then for Sunday, we've got things turn around to southerly from Nunivak Island northward, 15 knots, seas 3 feet. St. Matthew's got a westerly, 15 knots, seas 4 feet. The Pribilofs have northerlies, 20 knots, seas 5 feet. And Bristol Bay, northeasterlies 25 knots and seas 3 feet. Now for the Arctic coast. 20 to 25 knots all along the Arctic coast from the Beaufort Sea down to the Chukchi Sea. seas up to 6 feet in the polar easterlies that are going on up there. And as you get further north, it ramps up even more up in the Arctic. But then it turns around to westerlies, 20 knots, from about Point Ley on down to Kotzebue Sound. And then we drops off to about 15 knots, but still a westerly component, most of the winds down there, and seas up to about 4 feet. And then for Sunday, wind really backs off on those polar easterlies along the north slope and even the Chukchi Sea. Variable directions, 5 to 10 knots, and seas up to about 4 feet. But then we start to see southeasterlies 15 knots and seas all the way up to 7 feet from about Kotzebue Sound up to Cape Lisburne. And then some southerlies going on south of the Bering Strait, 15 knots, seas up to about 6 feet. So that's it for your marine forecast. Please let somebody know where you're going out there, and please stay very safe.